Wait, ensure to subscribe, like, and comment on this story. Thank you. The rain came in soft sheets that night, brushing against the windows of the Grand Oak Ridge Hotel like a forgotten lullaby. Inside the lobby, golden lamps glowed over marble floors, and the faint murmur of conversation floated through the warm air, laced with the occasional clink of silverware and glass. At first glance, the hotel exuded elegance and order, but tucked in a shadowed corner just behind the marble columns sat a tired waitress with a secret hope and a child whose world had never known ease. Emily Hart, 28, moved with the grace of someone used to carrying more than she could bear. Her uniform, simple black slacks and a white blouse beneath a faded apron, was damp from the walk-in, her shoes squeaking slightly with every hurried step. Yet her eyes searched only one spot in the room, the wheelchair by the fireplace. Her son, Joshua, 11 years old, wrapped in a blue blanket with stars, his legs too frail to carry him, his hands always trembling, but his spirit untouched. And tonight, something in him stirred. Joshua's gaze was locked on the grand piano, nestled beside the fire. Its lacquered frame glistened under the lights, untouched for years. It had become more ornament than instrument, but to Joshua, it was alive. Emily noticed the look in his eyes. It was the same one he'd had when he first reached for her music box as a toddler, back when his hands could still curl into fists before the doctors said muscular dystrophy. Before the world began measuring his life in what he couldn't do. She knelt beside him, ignoring the stiffness in her knees, and whispered, "Do you want to try?" His eyes, large, brown, full of something ancient and tender, met hers, and he nodded. Her arms, lean but strong from years of carrying trays, and hope lifted him from the wheelchair. He weighed nearly nothing, yet the moment felt heavier than any shift she'd worked. She guided him gently onto the bench, adjusting his thin frame so he wouldn't tip. For a second, silence. Then his fingers moved, tentative, stumbling, a broken chord. Another, and then something else. The notes shaped themselves into a melody, soft and aching, fragile hope wrapped in sound. A hush fell over the room. Conversations stilled, forks paused. Even the flames seemed to dim. At the far end of the lobby, beneath the muted glow of a chandelier, a man stirred in a leather armchair. Alexander Reed, owner of the Oak Ridge Hotel chain, billionaire, recluse, a man who, up until this moment, had seemed as cold and unreachable as the empire he ran. He set down his coffee, listened, and didn't move. Joshua's song drifted through the air like something holy, raw, imperfect, beautiful. It wasn't just a song. It was a story, his story, one that couldn't be told with words. The room forgot itself. The guests forgot their wine. Even the storm beyond the window seemed to hush. Emily stood behind her son, tears tracing silent, paths down her cheeks. When the final note faded into the hush, time seemed to shudder. Then applause, hesitant at first, then rising into something thunderous, and Alexander Reed stood. He walked with deliberate grace across the polished floor, cutting through the crowd, his gaze locked on the boy and his mother. Emily turned, startled, by the approach of the man she'd only ever heard of in headlines and whispered rumors. That, he said, voice deep and calm, was extraordinary. He turned to Joshua, kneeling so they were eye level. "You have a gift the world needs." "To hear, may I speak with you both?" Emily nodded slowly, heart racing. They moved to a quieter corner near the velvet curtains, away from the crowd. "I own a music foundation," Alexander began. "We support gifted youth, but your son, he's more than that. He's a voice the world doesn't know it needs. I want to help him share it." Emily could barely breathe. Joshua's fingers clutched the edge of the blanket in his lap, eyes wide, chest rising with hope and fear. Alexander leaned in, his next words soft but resolute. "I want to fund his training, give him lessons, equipment, everything he needs. No more waiting in the shadows." For the first time in years, Emily felt the weight on her chest lift, but just as she opened her mouth to respond, a shout rang out from the lobby entrance. "Excuse me, sir, you can't just barge in!" The lobby doors flew open. A man, drenched from the storm, stomped in, his face red with anger. In his hands, a folded letter, soaked, crumpled and shaking, his eyes locked onto Emily. "You think you can hide from me?" She froze. Joshua flinched. Alexander stood swiftly, protective. The air shifted, and in that moment, everything changed. The tension in the lobby thickened like fog as the man's soaked boots slapped against the marble floor, echoing through the stunned silence. Emily instinctively stepped in front of Joshua, her arms slightly outstretched, shielding him without a word. Her chest rose and fell in sharp, shallow breaths, but her voice, when it came, was calm, steady, and low. "Rick," she said, as if the name burned her mouth. "You're not supposed to be here." The man's eyes, stormy, bloodshot, narrowed at her. "I wrote you, called. You didn't answer." His voice was rough, crackling with a fury barely contained. He waved the soaked letter in the air like a weapon. "You thought you could run off, keep my son from me." Joshua blinked, shrinking back on the piano bench. His fingers, which moments ago danced with music, now trembled with fear. Alexander Reed stepped forward, a quiet authority in his every move. "I suggest you lower your voice." Rick turned his glare toward the billionaire, unfazed. "And who the hell are you?" "I'm the man who's going to make sure you don't raise your voice to her again," Alexander said evenly, his voice silk over steel. Emily's heart was pounding, her palms cold. She hadn't seen Rick in nearly 5 years, not since the day she'd packed a single duffel bag and left that crumbling one-bedroom apartment on the edge of a forgotten town. Not since the day he swore he'd take Joshua away from her if she didn't stop wasting time on his therapy, on music, on hope. She'd left to protect her son. She'd filed the paperwork. She'd prayed he'd vanish from their lives for good. But here he was, alive, loud, dangerous. "I'm his father," Rick spat, stepping closer. "And you had no right, no damn right to disappear with him." "Biological father," Emily replied, barely above a whisper. "That doesn't make you a dad." Rick's jaw clenched, his knuckles whitening around the letter. "You think because you serve drinks in some fancy hotel you can erase me?" Alexander took a measured step forward. "You'll speak to her with respect, or you'll leave." Rick looked him up and down, his tailored suit, his polished shoes, his calm composure. "Oh, I get it now," she found a rich man. "You buying your way into this too, huh? Bet you don't even know the first thing about that boy." Emily's hands were shaking. She wanted to scream, to run, to grab Joshua and disappear again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Alexander looked at Joshua, then back at Rick. "I don't need to know everything, but I do know this. That boy played a song tonight that made grown men cry, and any man who would interrupt that with threats isn't fit to call himself a father." Rick scoffed. "Save the hero act. You've known them for what, 10 minutes? You think you're some savior?" Emily stepped forward suddenly, her voice cracking. "Leave. Now." But Rick's smile twisted into something cruel. "I'm not going anywhere. I've already filed a petition. You'll be hearing from my lawyer by the end of the week." She froze. "What?" He held up a copy of the letter, triumphant. "Full custody. I want him back. You'll never be able to prove I'm unfit. You have nothing, no money, no real job. You live in a motel room that charges by the week. A judge'll eat that up." Emily's throat went dry. Rick leaned in closer, voice low and bitter. "You thought you could hide him in a piano lounge and play make-believe forever. That ends now. And with that, He turned and stalked out, the storm swallowing him again. The door slammed behind him. Emily stood still, her world tilting. Joshua let out a broken sob. "Is he going to take me away?" She dropped to her knees beside him, gathering him close. "No, baby. No one's taking you anywhere." Alexander stood nearby, watching, a shadow passing through his gaze. "We'll fight this," he said quietly. "He won't win." Emily looked up at him, her eyes searching his for a promise he hadn't yet spoken. "How?" she whispered. "I can't even afford an attorney." He knelt beside her, voice quiet but resolute. "Then I'll make sure you have the best one in the city." Emily's lip trembled. "Why would you do this for us?" His eyes locked with hers, blue-gray, intense, like a sea right before it swallows the shore. "I don't know," he admitted, softly. "But I do know I can't walk away now." Before Emily could speak again, Alexander's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out slowly, frowning as he read the message. His expression darkened. "Wait. Ensure to subscribe, like, and comment on this story. Thank you." "What is it?" she asked. He hesitated, then stood. "There's something I didn't tell you," he said quietly. "I think Rick's not acting alone." Emily's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Alexander's eyes didn't leave the screen. "I think someone powerful is helping him, and I just got a message that proves it." Emily sat on the edge of the hotel bed, her arms wrapped tightly around Joshua, who had finally fallen asleep, though his tiny fists still clung to her shirt. The rain pattered softly against the window pane now, as if the storm had exhaled and left only the memory of chaos. Across the room, Alexander stood near the desk, his silhouette framed by the city's cold glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He hadn't said much since the call, only that someone powerful was helping Rick, and now he was scrolling through his phone again, his face tight with something between worry and controlled fury. Emily watched him, her voice barely audible. "You said you had proof." He turned slowly. "I got a text from someone on the inside, one of my corporate security contacts. It was a warning." She frowned. "A warning?" Alexander handed her the phone. On the screen was a screenshot of an email thread, confidential with parts redacted. But one name jumped out at her in bold, Vincent Blackwood. Emily felt the air suck from her lungs. I know that name," she whispered. "You should," Alexander said grimly. "He's a venture capitalist, ruthless, ties to some of the dirtiest corporate buyouts in the last decade. He doesn't show up unless there's something to gain or someone to crush. But why would a man like that help Rick?" Alexander hesitated before responding. "That's what I've been trying to piece together. Blackwood doesn't do favors. He buys leverage." Emily's mind raced. Unless Rick promised him something, or someone. Alexander nodded slowly. "Joshua." Her blood ran cold. "You think he's after Joshua? Or you?" Alexander stepped closer. "Blackwood invests in talent. He acquires people the way other men collect art. Ruthless, silent, transactional. If he sees potential in you, or your son, he won't stop until he owns it." Emily stood, arms tightening. "We're not for sale." "I know," Alexander said, "but to him, it's not about consent. It's about control." She felt her chest squeeze tight, like the room was shrinking. "I need to know everything," he said gently. "How you met Rick, what he was into, anything that might connect him to Blackwood." She hesitated, then finally spoke. "Rick used to talk about a man who visited the bar where he worked. Said he drove a black car with no plates, always paid in cash. Rick bragged once that he was going to make it big, that someone had noticed him. I thought it was just drunk talk." Alexander nodded grimly. "That was Blackwood, or one of his messengers." Emily sat down again, numb. "So what now?" "They go to court, and some slick lawyer spins it all to make Rick look like a devoted father and me like the unstable ex. Unless we beat them at their own game." Alexander's jaw tightened. I've seen Blackwood take people apart from the inside, but he's never faced someone like me." She looked up at him. "What? Are you planning?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he crossed the room, opened a locked drawer in his suitcase, and pulled out a sleek black folder. Inside was a dossier with Vincent Blackwood's name stamped across the top in bold. "You've been watching him," she whispered, surprised. Alexander nodded. "He tried to buy out one of my companies 2 years ago. When I refused, he started a smear campaign. But I kept receipts." Emily's heart pounded with new hope and new fear. "So you're saying we fight fire with fire?" "I'm saying we hit him before he even knows we're coming." Just then, a knock came at the door. 3 sharp taps. They froze. Emily looked at Alexander, eyes wide. "Are you expecting someone?" He shook his head slowly. Another knock. Alexander crossed the room and opened the door an inch, just enough to peek out. Then his entire expression shifted. "What is it?" Emily asked. He turned back to her, eyes hard. "It's someone from my past, someone I thought I'd never see again." Emily stepped closer. "Who?" He opened the door fully. Standing there, drenched in rain and wrapped in a trench coat, was a woman with steel-grey eyes and blood-red lips. She carried herself like danger wrapped in silk. "Hello, Alexander," she said. "Still playing hero, I see." Emily stared, suddenly cold. Alexander's voice was like a blade. "What are you doing here, Camille?" The woman smiled. "Let's just say I have information about Rick, about Blackwood, and about the boy." Emily stiffened. Camille's gaze slid to her like a predator eyeing prey. "But first, we need to talk, alone." Camille strolled into the suite like a storm cloaked in elegance, raindrops still glistening on her coat like dew on poisoned roses. Her presence shifted the atmosphere. Suddenly, the air felt electric, charged with history and veiled threats. Emily instinctively moved in front of Joshua, shielding him as if the woman might lunge at any moment. Alexander, however, didn't flinch. He closed the door with a click that sounded more like a warning than a welcome. Camille didn't bother to sit. She turned to face them both with a calm, lethal grace. "I assume you remember how I work, Alex," she said, voice smooth, as satin and sharp as glass. "I don't come bearing favors. I come bearing leverage." "I remember," Alexander said coolly. "You trade in secrets like other people trade in stocks." Camille gave him a knowing smile. "And you always were the one man who refused to pay." Emily broke in. "What do you want from us?" Camille glanced at her, tilting her head. "Not much. Just a little cooperation and a bit of trust." "You'll forgive me if I don't feel very trusting right now," Emily said, her voice firm. Camille's eyes twinkled. "Good. You'll need that instinct." She pulled a flash drive from her coat pocket and handed it to Alexander. "Inside is everything I've collected on Rick's new benefactor, Vincent Blackwood. Bank accounts, property shells, surveillance footage, most of it off the books." Alexander took it slowly. "Why give this to me now?" Camille leaned in, her expression shifting from cool to grave. "Because I made a mistake. Years ago, I helped Blackwood bury something big. I didn't know what it was at the time, but now I think it has to do with the boy." Emily stiffened. "Joshua?" Camille nodded. "There's a file hidden in a vault under one of Blackwood's holding companies, Gene Phase International. It's classified under Project Helix, and it's tied to Rick, your son, and a genetic patent that could be worth billions." Emily's voice was hollow. "He's trying to take Joshua for money, for control," Camille said. "Your son's DNA may be the key to something Blackwood's been trying to replicate. For years, he doesn't want custody, he wants ownership." Alexander's jaw clenched. "Then we destroy the vault and the evidence." Camille raised an eyebrow. "You'll have to get to it first, and it's not just digital. Blackwood doesn't trust servers. The real data's stored the old-fashioned way, in a biometric safe. Only Rick has the key." Emily's breath caught. "So what do we do?" Camille smiled faintly. "We steal it back." Just then, Alexander's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression went ice cold. "What is it?" Emily asked. He turned the screen to her. A single message flashed across it, sent from an encrypted number. "Too late. He's already in motion." Attached was a photo, grainy surveillance footage of Rick standing outside a courthouse, holding Joshua's birth certificate, and walking hand in hand with a government official. Emily's knees buckled. "He's filed for emergency custody," she gasped. Alexander's voice was razor sharp. "Then we move. Tonight." Night draped the city in shadows as the black SUV sped through back alleys and empty streets. Camille sat in the back seat beside Emily, now wearing a borrowed hoodie and gripping Joshua's favorite stuffed elephant like it was a sword. In the front, Alexander drove like a man with nothing to lose. "Security is light at night," Camille said, checking her pistol. "But we've got 10 minutes before the window closes. Once the retinal scanner deactivates for maintenance, that's our chance." Emily stared at her. "What happens if we fail?" Camille didn't blink. "Then Blackwood gets what he wants, and the custody hearing becomes a formality." They arrived at a nondescript building nestled between two warehouses. Gene Phase International. No sign, no guards. Just a keypad and a door that looked more like a bank vault than an office entrance. Camille typed in a code. The light turned green. "Stay close," Alexander murmured to Emily as they descended into the building's bowels. Concrete walls, blinking cameras, silence that buzzed in the ears. At the end of a long corridor, they reached the vault. A biometric scanner blinked red. "This is where it gets tricky," Camille said. "Rick's retinal scan is on file, but I cloned his pattern from a photo last year." She pulled out a lens device and pressed it to the scanner. A long pause. Then, click. The door slid open with a hiss. Inside, rows of drawers stretched into darkness. Camille went straight for one marked H7. She pulled it open and retrieved a sealed black case. "This is it," she said, just as the alarm started screaming. Alexander cursed. "They knew." A voice echoed over the intercom, smooth and venomous. "I see you found my secret, Alexander, but secrets have a price." Emily's blood froze. "Blackwood. You should have stayed out of it," the voice said. "Now I'll take the boy and burn the rest." Then boom! The floor shuddered. Fire alarms shrieked. Flames licked up from the hallway. "They're torching the building," Camille yelled. "It's a trap." Alexander grabbed Emily's hand. "This way!" They sprinted through smoke, dodging falling debris. Behind them, Camille stayed at the vault, typing furiously into a tablet. "Camille, come on!" Alexander shouted. She turned, eyes fierce. "I'll hold them off. Get the boy to safety." "Camille, go!" With no choice, they ran. Minutes later, they burst into the night air, Emily coughing, clutching the black case as sirens howled in the distance. They looked back just in time to see the building erupt into flames. Camouflaged. By the night, erased from the world, Alexander stared at the inferno. "She saved us." Emily opened the case. Inside, a single folder. No USBs, no hard drives. She opened it, and her hands began to shake. It was a birth record. Not just Joshua's, a second name was listed under Project Helix, Alexander William Blackwood. Subject Alpha. Emily looked up at him, stunned. Alexander's face went pale. "That's not possible," she whispered. "You're his first experiment." He staggered back a step, his eyes wide. From the flames behind them, a second SUV rolled out from the shadows, headlights flaring, a window lowered. Rick smiled from the passenger seat. "I told you," he sneered. "You have no idea who you're up against." Wait, ensure to subscribe, like, and comment on this story. Thank you.